What if the homeless veteran standing before a judge turned out to be the very man who once saved her brother's life in war? He had no home, no private attorney, no one to call, only a name. And that name brought the entire courtroom to a standstill. It was a cold winter morning at Jefferson County Court. Frost clung to rooftops outside, while inside, Judge Rebecca Hart was preparing for what seemed like just another ordinary day. The next case on the docket looked routine. A homeless man charged with trespassing. He had broken into a building just to find shelter from the bitter cold. Nothing out of the ordinary. Until the court clerk read the defendant's name, Ethan Cole. Rebecca froze. Her fingers tightened around the case file. Ethan Cole, a name she had seen only once, in the last letter her brother, Lieutenant Michael Hart, wrote home from Fallujah, Iraq. A soldier who had risked his life running through enemy fire to drag Michael to safety. A man she had never met but had never forgotten. And now he stood before her not in uniform, not with medals, but as a forgotten homeless veteran, worn down and invisible in a city of glass towers. This story isn't just about a courtroom. It's about a battlefield from 2 decades ago and the present-day trial of gratitude, justice, and humanity. We'll explore how yesterday's heroes became today's invisible men. What systems failed thousands of homeless veterans like Ethan Cole? And what happens when justice finally remembers their names? This is the story of a courtroom, a memory of war, and a judge who decided to act when everyone else looked away. It was the kind of cold January morning that makes even the courthouse heaters groan. Frost clung to the windows of Jefferson County Court as Judge Rebecca Hart adjusted her black robe, flipped through the day's docket, and sipped coffee that had already gone lukewarm. Case number 10, trespassing, misdemeanor. Defendant, Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole. A routine charge. A homeless man found sleeping in the back booth of a 24-hour diner after closing time. Rebecca had handled dozens like it before, usually a small fine, time served, maybe community service. But when the bailiff called, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Hart," and the defendant stepped forward, the air in the courtroom shifted. He wore an oversized coat, a beard worn thick from time on the street. But the name Ethan Cole rang inside her like a drumbeat from another lifetime. She remembered it clearly, written in blue ink on the final letter from her kid brother, Lieutenant Michael Hart, sent from the battlefield in Fallujah. "Mom, Dad, tell Becca I'm safe. A staff sergeant named Ethan Cole dragged me out of hell today." Close up, her hand froze mid-page. The gavel hovered but never dropped. For a breathless second, even justice held still. Courtrooms run on rhythm. Charge, plea, sentence, next. But that morning the rhythm broke. Reporters later described the room as off balance, as if everyone felt something shift but no one could explain it. The prosecutor cleared his throat. The public defender glanced up, puzzled, as Judge Hart's eyes filled with mist. And then she asked, calmly but clearly, "Mr. Cole, do you recall Fallujah? April 6, 2004? Heads turned. The defendant stiffened. And for the first time in years, Ethan Cole stood tall, not as a vagrant, but as a Marine, answering roll call. In that instant, a petty charge became a mirror reflecting 2 wars, one with bullets, the other with bureaucracy and bench warrants. When a name bridges the past and present, it reminds us, justice isn't just law, it's humanity. A judge, a defendant, and a forgotten act of courage, all converging to ask the same silent question. Do we see the man in front of us, or just the case number on the file? The room didn't know it yet, but the next 3 hours would change Ethan's future and reshape Rebecca's belief in the robe she wore. To understand why one question, "Do you recall Fallujah?" shook the very walls of that courtroom, we have to go back 20 years to the dust-choked streets of a war zone, where a young lieutenant met a seasoned Marine under a sky lit by tracer rounds. So strap on your flak vest. We're boarding a convoy to 2004. Fallujah, 2004. A firefight that changed everything. You'll hear the true story of an ambush that forged a bond strong enough to stop a gavel 2 decades later. April 2004. Fallujah, Iraq. Ask any veteran who served there, and they won't tell you about tactical maps or mission briefings. They'll talk about the heat so intense it scorched the soul, about the dust that got in your teeth and eyes, and the explosions that came without warning. And they'll never forget the day a convoy nearly didn't come back. That morning, 24-year-old Lieutenant Michael Hart was leading a convoy carrying medical supplies. Smart, young, still kept a habit of writing in his journal. But there's no such thing as youth in war. The destination was a forward outpost just 6 miles away, but the route passed through a stretch of road nicknamed the Devil's Mile. As the third vehicle made a turn, gunfire erupted. An RPG hit the lead Humvee. Black smoke filled the air. Sirens wailed. Michael was hit. Shrapnel tore into his upper thigh, dropping him hard onto the roadside gravel. The rest of the unit tried to return fire, but the enemy barrage was overwhelming. The radio crackled with panic. Man down! Man down! We've got a lieutenant hit! Through the rain of bullets, one man left cover. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole, twice recommended for promotion, charged across the kill zone, grabbed Michael by the vest, and dragged him behind a crumbling wall. Michael, barely conscious, tried to protest, whispering, "Just leave me go!" But Ethan snapped back. Not on my watch. For the next 7 minutes, he applied pressure to the wound with one hand and fired back with the other, holding off the enemy long enough for backup to reach them. When a medic was shot attempting to assist, Ethan ran out again, hauling that man back too. 2 lives, 1 Marine, and still breathing. No one knows exactly how they made it out of that ambush. But when the medevac finally landed, Ethan was the last to board, carrying Michael on his back, his uniform soaked in someone else's blood. Lieutenant Michael Hart survived that day. That night, with trembling hands, he wrote home, "Becca, if there's one reason I still believe in good people, even in a place like this, it's Staff Sergeant Cole." 2 weeks later, Michael was killed by an IED while on patrol. And Ethan, the quiet hero, was redeployed to Afghanistan. After that, he vanished from the Hart family's world. Some moments last only minutes, but they define a person's entire life. Ethan Cole didn't receive a medal that day, no press coverage, no viral video, not even an official thank you. Only dust, blood, and an unspoken vow every soldier understands. No one gets left behind. 20 years later, that moment still lived on in a faded letter, in a sister's memory, and in the eyes of a homeless veteran standing before a courtroom. But why? Why did a man who once saved lives on the battlefield end up sleeping on sidewalks in the freezing dark? Michael Hart came home in a flag-draped coffin. Ethan Cole came home with wounds no one could see and a life society had no place for. They survived the same war, but only one was honored. The other? Forgotten. Have you ever wondered what happens to heroes after they stop being heroes? And why would a judge spend her entire career searching for a man she'd never met? Because some letters don't just carry words, they carry fate. The last letter Lieutenant Michael Hart wrote from Fallujah was penned the night after the ambush. The ink had bled near the edges. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, and heavy with urgency. "Rebecca, I don't know what tomorrow holds, but if there's one thing that makes this life feel worth it, it's that I'm still breathing today, because of a man named Ethan Cole. He pulled me out of hell, and if I live to return, I want to be the kind of officer he is, even just a little." When Michael was killed, the Hart family was shattered. But Rebecca, she reread his letters dozens of times, searching for what was left unsaid between the lines. Ethan Cole. The name kept appearing. No address, no specific unit. Just Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole, the man who never left my side. Rebecca was only 19 back then, but from that moment on, she made a vow. I will find him, no matter how long it takes. She went to law school, not out of passion for courtrooms, but because she felt that somewhere there had to be a way to make sacrifice heard. When she became a judge, Rebecca began quiet reforms: legal aid for veterans, compassionate sentencing for the homeless, partnerships with outreach programs. But in her heart, she was still searching for one name: Ethan Cole. The military doesn't share post-discharge contact details. She wrote to the Department of Defense, the VA, veterans groups. No answers. Until one cold winter morning, Ethan Cole reappeared, not in military records, but in a jail roster, arrested for falling asleep in a closed diner, trying to stay warm. Some say war makes heroes. Rebecca believes war reveals them. Men like Ethan don't ask for recognition. They never expect anything back. But from those blood-stained letters came a silent promise. If he saved my brother's life, then it's my turn to save his honor. But what happened in those 20 years? How did a man once willing to die for others end up alone, cold, and cast aside? When Ethan Cole came home, he wasn't whole. Not from the scars on his skin, but from the damage inside. He returned with a backpack, a few medals, and a mind haunted by gunfire, smoke, and the final screams of brothers who never answered back. At first, he tried to live normal. Construction work in Kansas, long days digging trenches, cold beers at night, and nightmares full of Fallujah. But the migraines started, then the panic attacks. He woke up hitting walls, screaming names no one else knew. Doctors diagnosed him with severe PTSD and mild traumatic brain injury from multiple blast waves. He applied for support from the Department of Veterans Affairs, but he'd lost some medical records, had no legal guidance, and the only reply he ever got read, "Claim denied. Insufficient medical basis. Please provide further documentation." The VA turned him away. His wife left, and after a back injury on the job left him unable to climb scaffolding. Layer by layer, it all fell apart, until Ethan had no home, no one to call, no place left to go. One winter night he slept under a bridge near downtown. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. No one walking by recognized that this man once earned a silver star. No one remembered his name, and Ethan was not alone. Every single night in America, over 33,000 veterans sleep on the streets. Many of them were once trained warriors men who carried wounded brothers through gunfire. How can a country spend billions on war but can't keep a roof over the heads of those who fought for it? In recent months, Ethan had taken to sitting behind a small diner. Not to ask for money, just to sit. The head cook, a man named Jimmy, sometimes left a meal box out back after closing. He didn't say much, just placed it down and walked away. One night, Jimmy spoke softly. "My dad was a soldier. He once told me, if I ever met a man named Ethan Cole to help him, said a guy by that name saved his whole unit in Iraq." Ethan didn't reply. He never imagined that his name was the reason a warm meal appeared beside him some nights. Ethan Cole once pulled others out of hell, but for 2 decades, no one came to pull him out of the silence. So why do men like him get trapped in endless paperwork, quiet suffering, and social invisibility? Ethan never believed he would become invisible. After leaving the military, he was promised much: lifetime medical care, disability assistance, help with reintegration. But when he needed those promises most, every door was locked. The first time he applied for benefits, his combat injury documentation from Fallujah was lost. Without it, the system marked him as ineligible. He was told to submit records from a military hospital that had been shut down in 2009. He had to start over, prove again that he had been injured, where he served, what doctor he saw, how he was treated. No attorney, no one to guide him through VA Form 21526EZ. Each rejection meant 6 to 12 more months of waiting. Once he waited over 500 days for a letter that simply read, "We require additional documentation." People assume that medals open doors, but the truth is, the U.S. Veterans Benefit System doesn't run on honor. It runs on paperwork. Thousands like Ethan Brave, decorated, fail at the very first hurdle, missing a notarized copy of a medical form. No one deliberately abandons them, but no one remembers them either. And while that silence drags on, time runs out. His savings dried up. The headaches got worse. One night, Ethan stood in front of a VA clinic door, but couldn't summon the strength to wait in line. So he turned around and never went back. Not because he was weak, but because he was tired of having to prove he was worth saving. This isn't just Ethan's story. It's the story of thousands of veterans men who didn't die in war, but slowly faded in the silence that followed it. When Ethan walked into that courtroom, head bowed, charged with criminal trespass for sleeping inside a closed diner, no one knew the ragged man before them had once led a platoon, charged into gunfire, and kept a vow burned into every Marine's soul: leave no one behind. Only one person recognized him: the judge, the woman seated at the highest bench, the woman holding a letter stained with ink, memory, and survival. Judge Rebecca Hart. She didn't recognize him by the coat he wore, but by a name she had carried in her heart for 2 decades. The hearing should have lasted 5 minutes. But from that moment on, time stood still, and justice began to look at itself. Rebecca studied the man in front of her. Tired eyes, shivering hands, but a posture that stood out, Not the hunched, darting stance of the homeless men she'd sentenced before, but something else, a fragment of old discipline, a trace of military bearing. The name Ethan Cole didn't just summon a memory, it pulled her back to her brother's funeral, to the flag folded and placed gently in her hands, to the men in dress blues, and to one man who approached her grieving parents, held them close, and whispered, "Your son saved my life." Rebecca had asked his name that day, but before he could finish, he was called away, deployed again. Now in a small courtroom, fate had brought them together again. Not as a family reunited, but as a judge and a defendant. And in that moment when the heart spoke louder than the law, Rebecca knew this couldn't be just another court case, not for a man who had once walked through fire for others. Ethan didn't know. He thought this was just another hearing, another fine, maybe a few nights in jail, then back to the cold underpass. But this time, the woman on the bench remembered his name. And for the first time in 20 years, Ethan Cole was about to hear 3 words he never thought he'd hear again. We remember you. What happens when a country forgets your name, but one person never does? Why would a judge risk her career and reputation for a homeless man no one else sees? Can justice ever be wide enough to include gratitude? In the next chapter, you'll witness what has rarely happened in a courtroom. A trial paused not for a legal error, but because honor needed to be restored. The room fell silent as Judge Rebecca Hart gently placed the file back on her desk. She looked up not as a judge staring at a defendant, but as a person facing the unfinished chapter of her past. "Mr. Cole," she said, "did you serve in Fallujah in 2004? Her voice remained steady, but her eyes brimmed with memory. Ethan flinched. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. Then, like muscle memory, he straightened his back, an old instinct kicking in. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied. "United States Marine Corps, 2nd Battalion Charlie Company." Rebecca continued, "And on April 6th of that year, during an ambush, did you carry a wounded officer named Michael Hart out of the line of fire?" The room held its breath. Eyes widened. Reporters grabbed their pens. The bailiff froze mid-step. Ethan slowly looked up. Eyes worn by years on the streets lit with something between shock and pain. "Lieutenant Hart," he repeated softly, as if hearing that name for the first time in decades. "He was so young. I remember clearly. Took a hit in the thigh, but kept telling me to leave him behind and help the others. I dragged him behind the wall, laid down cover fire so the medics could get in." A quiet breath escaped from someone seated behind him. "Did he make it, Your Honor?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. Rebecca fought to stay composed, lips pressed tightly together. "He lived for 2 more weeks, long enough to write about you, in the last letter he ever sent our family." Then, from the gallery, an older man in a Marine Corps League jacket suddenly rose to his feet. "Permission to speak, Your Honor. I know this isn't procedure, but that's the man who saved me. Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole. I was there. He risked his life and saved 6 of us that day." The room froze. No one stopped him, because some testimonies don't need an oath, just a heart that knows truth when it hears it. Rebecca gave a soft nod, then gently tapped the gavel. "Court will recess for 10 minutes, she declared. "Bailiff, please keep Mr. Cole in the courtroom." 10 minutes later, everyone returned to their seats. 3 men in formal military dress entered the courtroom, a colonel, a master sergeant, and a young private holding a polished wooden box. Ethan stood up immediately, an instinct born from years in uniform. The entire room shifted into silence, as if they were suddenly back on a battlefield during a medal ceremony. Rebecca removed her glasses and set them down, a gesture she hadn't made since becoming a judge. In that moment, she wasn't Judge Hart. She was just Rebecca, the sister of a fallen soldier, the woman who owed Ethan Cole her brother's final 2 weeks of life. Colonel James Matthews, Michael's former commanding officer, stepped forward. "Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole," he said, his voice steady and clear, "the Department of Defense has reviewed all declassified reports from the April 6, 2004 ambush in Fallujah based on new testimony and updated intelligence. What you did that day didn't just save 6 men. It broke up an ambush that could have wiped out the entire convoy." He gave a nod. The young private opened the wooden box. Inside, resting on a ribbon of deep blue, was the Navy Cross, the second highest honor a Marine can receive, just below the Medal of Honor. For extraordinary heroism and actions well beyond the call of duty, the colonel continued, the Secretary of the Navy formally awards you the Navy Cross. The entire courtroom rose to their feet. No one needed to be asked. Veterans straightened their backs and saluted. Journalists stopped writing. Even the prosecutor bowed his head. Ethan stood motionless, not because he didn't understand what was happening, but because after 20 long years, someone finally remembered him, remembered his name, and remembered the truth. Rebecca stepped down from the bench and walked toward him. "Ethan," she said softly, voice trembling but eyes steady, "that day you told my brother, no one gets left behind. Today we're saying the same thing for you. Can a medal undo 2 decades of being forgotten? Maybe not. But it can be a beginning. Because justice isn't just punishment. It's recognition. It's dignity restored. It's saying someone's name and remembering why they deserve to stand tall again." Apartment 104, a modest unit in a veterans housing complex on the city's edge. Ethan Cole stood before the bathroom mirror, combing back strands of silver hair. His hands shook slightly as he buttoned a crisp white shirt, one he never thought he'd wear again. On the wall, a simple wooden frame held the Navy Cross, Purple Heart, and several older medals lovingly recovered and restored by Alexander Rossi, a court-appointed attorney, after discovering they'd once been sold at a storage auction long ago. Ethan reached out and touched the glass. He said nothing, but his eyes had changed. No more shame, no more self-doubt, only peace. The day he left the courtroom, he didn't return to the underpass. Instead, he moved into a 1-bedroom unit through the veteran housing program created years ago by Judge Rebecca Hart. A real bed, a simple kitchen, a window that let in the morning light. To some, it was modest. To Ethan, it was a new world. He began attending PTSD therapy sessions twice a week, started keeping a journal, something he once called a luxury of emotion, joined a support group for formerly homeless veterans where, for the first time, he shared his story not as someone who needed help, but as someone who had survived. Rebecca visited him once a week, not as a judge, but as a sister who had kept a promise for 20 years. During one visit, she handed him a small wooden box. Inside, every letter Michael had ever written home, preserved like sacred heirlooms. Ethan read each one slowly, as if speaking to an old friend across time. Some letters made him laugh. Others made him sit in silence. And one made him cry, not from pain, but because he had been remembered. One evening, Jimmy, the diner cook who had always left him meals, brought Ethan an old photo. It was of his father as a young Marine, standing with a group in Fallujah, and in the far right corner, barely recognizable but unmistakable, Ethan, 20 years younger, holding an M16, eyes sharp, still full of fire. "My dad said," Jimmy told him, "if I ever met a man named Ethan Cole, I should know I owe him my life." Ethan's story began to spread. A local newspaper ran a short feature. A podcast interviewed him, not because he chased the spotlight, but because people finally wanted to listen to someone who had been left behind. He often told the group in therapy, "I'm not a hero. I just tried to survive. And I did, because someone remembered my name." Ethan had a place to sleep, but more importantly, he had a reason to wake up. But what about the others? How many heroes are still out there, waiting for someone to say their name? In the next chapter, we'll look beyond Ethan's journey. We'll compare, reflect, and draw lessons from other nations to see just how much better America could do in keeping its promises to those who once kept theirs. Because Ethan Cole is an American Marine. But had he been born in Canada, Australia, or even New Zealand, would his story have ended differently? Maybe. In Canada, every veteran is assigned a veteran navigator, a personal caseworker who helps guide them through everything, filing paperwork, finding housing, securing employment, and accessing health care. There are no silent denials over a missing form. No one gets lost in red tape alone. In Australia, the Department of Veterans Affairs guarantees a response to every claim within 30 days. Even more remarkably, veterans struggling with mental health are entitled to lifetime free treatment, no need to prove battlefield trauma. All that matters is they served. New Zealand may be the most forward-thinking of all, offering a single digital platform that integrates all veteran services. No bureaucratic maze, no missing documents, no confusion like the kind Ethan endured for years. And then there's America. Here it's more complicated. Every year, hundreds of thousands of U.S. veterans are asked to resubmit paperwork that the military itself once issued. They're forced to prove they were injured, prove they suffered, prove they survived, all to a system that often doubts before it believes. Not because America lacks good programs, but because the system is too big, too fragmented, and far too easy for someone to fall through the cracks. At a legal conference, Judge Rebecca Hart once said, "We can deploy thousands of troops in a matter of hours, but it takes years to bring them back to a normal life. Why is that?" That question isn't just for the government. It's for all of us. And just like Ethan's story, not every solution begins with legislation. Sometimes it starts with an acknowledging glance, a helping hand, or just one person choosing not to look away. Like Jimmy the diner cook who quietly left hot meals without ever asking for a reason. Like Rebecca who had never met Ethan before, yet believed in the name written in her brother's final letter. So now the question is, we who live in peace, what will we do with the truth that someone once fought for us and is now sleeping on the sidewalk tonight? Can we do things differently? Yes, but only if we start seeing them. A medal cannot save a man if an entire society turns its back, but sometimes a single look at the right moment can save an entire life. And that's when we, the people, need to speak up. Ethan Cole's story isn't meant to make you feel sorry. It's not just one man's tragedy. It's a reminder that there's still time to fix this, to take a stand, to choose what's right. You don't have to be a judge to make a difference. You don't need a courtroom to bring justice. You can start right where you are. If you're an everyday person, you can. Write a thank you letter to a veteran in your community. A simple thank you can restore a strength they forgot they had. Support organizations helping homeless veterans like the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans or Fisher House Foundation. Share Ethan's story so others can see what society too often chooses to ignore. If you work in law, public service, or healthcare, you can be the one who untangles the red tape. Be the one who doesn't ask, "Do you qualify?" but instead asks, "How can I help you?" If you're currently serving or a veteran yourself, you know this truth better than anyone. The battlefield doesn't always stay overseas. It lingers every day in the post-war lives of your brothers and sisters in arms, and you can be the one to help them find their way home. In one group therapy session, Ethan once spoke quietly but firmly. Someone asked me why, after all those years of being forgotten, I still got back up. I told them, because someone remembered my name. It doesn't take millions to remember a soldier's name. Just one person at the right time choosing not to turn away. Rebecca Hart couldn't save everyone who fought on the battlefield, but she did help restore honor to justice. And she sparked a movement within the system she served. We can't rewrite the past, but we can choose who doesn't get left behind in the future. If you believe no hero should sleep on the sidewalk they once defended, if you believe courage deserves remembrance, if you believe no one gets left behind applies both in war and at home, then stand up, speak up, and remember their names. Leave a comment with the word respect if you believe men like Ethan Cole deserve to be remembered by all of us. You've made it to the end of Ethan Cole's emotional journey, a forgotten hero who finally found recognition. But if you think that story was powerful, our next video will leave you speechless. Thugs assault a homeless man, not knowing he's ex-CIA. The shocking twist. A group of street thugs thought they were just attacking a helpless homeless man late at night. What they didn't know was that he used to be CIA trained to survive the most brutal scenarios imaginable. And the twist? It'll leave you stunned. Click now to watch and prepare for one of the most unexpected endings you'll ever see. Never underestimate someone just because they've fallen. Link to the next video is in the description below.